Welcome to Managing Through Crisis, where Harvard Business School faculty share their insights about how to lead yourself and others in challenging times. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Professor Sandra Sucher, an expert on trust and the author of The Power of Trust, How Companies Build It, Lose It, Regain It. Welcome, Sandra.
Oh, thanks so much.
I'm just going to set a little bit of context for us here. The 2021 Edelman Trust Barometer, which I know you're familiar with, surveyed 33,000 people in 28 countries to gauge their trust in government, NGOs, business, and the media. And that revealed that people don't know where or who to turn to for reliable information. A majority of the respondents believe that leaders and journalists are purposely trying to mislead people. And the study finds that we are in the midst of what they're calling an infodemic.
Yeah.
Somewhat surprisingly, the study showed that business is the most trusted institution among those that they studied, and the only institution seen as both ethical and competent. So my first question to you is, why doesn't it feel that way? It doesn't feel like that at all from where I'm standing.
Yeah, so with respect to Edelman, so here's what they do. They survey and compare people's trust in institutions. Right. And so they're comparing whether or not you, relatively speaking, trust business more, government more, NGOs, or the media. And so they give you scores for those, and then we get to see like who's doing well. And the trend of business actually doing pretty well has been established for a couple of years. And so I think the discrepancy that you feel is something around the difference between what happens when you fill out a survey. And I'm asked to kind of think about these various institutions and how they're doing in society. And then when you think about the way those same institutions affect your life.
Yeah.
And so for business, compared with, honestly, the other three, we touch people in all different ways. We're customers, we're employees, we're shareholders, we're members of communities where people do business. And so on that daily lived experience front, I think that from a trust standpoint, we tend to look at how companies' actions affect us and the people we care about. And in that regard, we probably have a different kind of a calculus if something has gone south.
You've looked at so many companies with this topic of trust in mind. How do you know if your employees and customers trust you? How do you know if they're being honest about their lack of trust in you?
Yeah, so the good news here, for better or worse, is that people vote with their feet. So trust is a willingness to be vulnerable to other people's actions and intentions. So what that means is that if I'm a customer, I'm relying on companies for their products and services. And so if I wanted to know whether or not my customers trust me, I'd look at customer retention and see how I'm faring directly with that. I'd look about, the NPS scores, customers' willingness to recommend you. And that's a kind of a funny tool, but to the extent that it's used well in a company, you have some bead on what it is. And most of all, honestly, from the standpoint of trust, I'd look at whether people have had problems with your company and whether or not they're still with you. Because being able to recover from a problem is probably the hallmark of trust. I certainly knew when I was an executive at Fidelity, people became more loyal after they had a problem with the company. We were able to fix it. And the same is generally true, of course, with trust. So for customers, there are measures of these things that you can look at. And if your company doesn't have measures, those three, that's a place where I would start. I think with respect to employees, I'd probably ask, and this is maybe unfair, how are you doing with the Great Resignation?
Yeah.
Right. So there, I think the question is, we know that there are all kinds of forces encouraging employees to take advantage of this kind of unique moment in the labor market where they have the upper hand. And so the first thing I'd look at as to whether or not people trust me is, how am I doing on my voluntary terminations? How many people are leaving? And there again, there are processes in place. We do exit interviews. We do all kinds of things to try to understand why people do that. If that were true, I would double down right now and really try to understand what's going on with my employees and what it is that's on their minds. I think that you can look at engagement. and also whether employees recommend you as a place to work. But right now, I think the focus should be on sort of who's staying, who's leaving, and why.
Yeah. So let's assume you've done the research, you know that you've got a trust issue. What should you do about it? What can business leaders do to regain the trust that they've lost?
Yeah, so there's a well-established formula, believe it or not, for restoring lost trust. That's actually really good news, and it's got 3 steps to it. So the first step is you have to acknowledge responsibility and apologize. Right. So if you've done something, that's step 1. Step 2 is you have to actually explain and try to understand what went wrong. Right. People want to know that you know what it is that you did and that you understand what it is that you did. And then the third step is what's called an offer of repair. And this is where you try to dig in and say, okay, if I did this thing wrong, what is it that I can do for you to try to make you whole and believe in my company again? And so a great example of this, they don't like, usually when I say this, is PricewaterhouseCoopers. And what they did during the 2017 Oscars, when the wrong company got the Best Picture award. So, to their credit, literally that night, there was an announcement up on their website and PR releases apologizing for what they did wrong, explaining for the fact that inadvertently the wrong envelope had been handed to the presenter. And then they spent the next couple of months working with interviewing directly the people who've been affected by this, and then working with the academy to try to figure out what protocols they should put in place to guarantee that this would never happen again. So that's what trust recovery looks like. It's not mysterious, but it does require intentionality. And you have to say, this is something I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, and I guess real self-reflection on the part of the organization to be able to say, we got to take a hard look at ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think that actually is probably the biggest foundation of establishing trusting relationships, is to understand that it really is a relationship. You are part of it and the other party's part of it. And I think that the companies that do this well, they think all the time about this question about what are we doing to make this work? And what is it that we could do more of?
Yeah. Are there big missteps that you can describe for us that the business leaders should be sure not to make as they're doing this? They're doing it with the right intention, but boy, we know that sometimes good intentions come out badly.
Yeah, so probably the biggest misstep that companies make is thinking that trust is a question of managing your reputation. Now, I'm the first person to say reputations are important and a very good thing, but we know from the research that trust is built from the inside out. It's really impossible to build trust with your employees, with your customers, if your employees don't have trust in you. And so I think the biggest misstep is not understanding kind of the origin of trust and where it sits and the role that you can play. And this is probably good news if you're a company. This is something you actually have some control over and can really try to influence. So that's the biggest misstep, is to think that it's a problem on the outside when it's actually a problem on the inside.
Yeah. This has been always great talking with you. These insights are great, and I want to thank you for sharing them. I've got one more question before we let you go, which is for those business leaders that are listening to this and watching this conversation, what can they do today to get started on rebuilding trust?
So I have one very concrete suggestion, and the suggestion is the next time you have to make a big decision or a substantial decision, to ask yourself and the people in the room, will this action cause us to build trust or to lose trust, and with whom? And so I think the trick here is building the question of trust into decision-making and making sure that it's something that you keep front and forward. And because different parties trust you for different reasons, some people may trust you more for something you do, and others will trust you less. And I think really starting to look at business decision-making through this lens of who's gaining, who's losing, and how am I faring here? I think that will actually really help keep trust front and forward.
Great advice. Sandra Sucher, thank you so much for joining us on Managing Through Crisis.
Okay, great. Thank you.